Okay, I think the microphone is on now. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being with us here tonight. Just wanted to get started by acknowledging we have a couple of translators. We have an ASL interpreter here, as well as a Spanish-speaking translator. So if there is anyone who is speaking Spanish in the audience and would like to come down, please feel free to move to this area of the audience. I'll invite our translator to translate that for us really quickly, and then we'll officially get started with an intro from Chancellor Donna Rossland.
Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos. Solo queríamos hacerles saber antes de que comenzáramos esta reunión que tenemos intérpretes aquí disponibles, una intérprete de español, así que si alguien tenga preguntas o comentarios o quisiera acceder el contenido de esta reunión, se puede moverse a esta parte, esta sección de la audiencia para que puedan recibir y acceder una parte de la información de esta reunión.
Good evening. I'm Donna Plowman, Chancellor here at UT Knoxville, and we're really, really excited to have you here. We're thrilled to host this event tonight, and I want to thank you for coming. I don't know if you felt the way I did. If this was the first time that you've been in this building, the first time I saw it, my reaction was that boy student unions didn't look like that when I went to college. But we're grateful for the support from the state that's helped us build this union. It took over several years, but I think as you walked in, you can see how often it's used. I think there's a homecoming committee in that room, something else going in the others, and we love sharing this facility. So thank you so much for choosing us, and I want to thank the commissioner for choosing us. Rocky Top is a place to hold this conversation tonight. We value our relationship with the Tennessee Department of Education more than I can say. You might think, well, we're over here at the university. What do we have to do with the Tennessee Department of Education? Everything. Because the graduates that come all the way through the program are our students here, and we're in this together. It's a partnership from kindergarten, pre-K, all the way to graduate school. And so we're grateful to lift that up. We love I'll just name one. We're very excited about our UTK's Grow Your Own program, which is a partnership with the department and with Knox County Schools, trying to strengthen the talent pipeline, and we're really committed to that and need more teachers, more good teachers, and want to be part of that process. So thank you to you for being part of this conversation. What a great way to focus on and lift up the success of our students. It's all of our responsibility. So I just want to say, let's all lift up our commitment tonight to making things better for children, for parents of children, for our communities. And I look forward to this, what I know will be a quite respectful and productive conversation. And now I'm thrilled to turn it over to the Tennessee Department of Education. Are we still going to have a few housekeeping items? Okay, yes we are. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to this evening, Commissioner.
Chancellor Plowman, thank you so much. Student unions didn't look like this when I came to school here. It is always great to be at Tennessee Ball, and especially today. So I'll just say that before we get started. Again, thank you all for taking time out of your personal schedules, personal lives to join us here this evening for a very important conversation about public education and public education funding in the state of Tennessee. I am Chelsea Crawford. I am Chief of Staff at the Department of Education, and I want to get us started just telling us a little bit about how this event is going to work. Most of you all, when you registered this evening at the front desk, had a chance to scan that QR code to sign up to speak. Really, we are here tonight to hear from you. You'll hear the commissioner talk for just a few minutes about where we're going, the kind of discussion that we want to have tonight, but we want to hear your hopes and dreams, your visions for the future as it relates to public schools and the funding that goes with public schools and public school students. What we are going to do is have the commissioner open us up with some remarks, and then we're actually going to invite you all to speak. I want to introduce a couple of folks who will have microphones to kind of help make sure that everyone in the room and those who are streaming online can hear your statement. That's Scott over here and Victoria on the right. When we get started, I am going to call the name of the person who will speak first and just ask you to raise your hand so that we can run a microphone to you. I will then call the name of the person who is on deck next to speak so that we can get a microphone to that person. We really want to hear from as many of you as possible. So please feel free to sign up using that QR code. Go ahead and register and we'll get you on deck to provide some comments tonight. Everyone will have just a couple of minutes to share. I know that this is an issue that's very dear and near to all of our hearts, and we also don't want to keep you here all evening, and so we're really looking forward to hearing just a couple of minutes from each of you. While we are very excited to work with you on this opportunity to discuss the state's formula for public education, before we begin, the department would like to remind you all of the following. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is proposed to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in a new public funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant to the Tennessee Open Records Public Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by these committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the new proposed funding formula. I said a lot of words, there was a lot of P words in there that I got tripped up on today, but really I just want to reiterate that we want to hear from you all about what you would like to see in the future. So with that, I will invite Commissioner Penny Schwinn to come up and talk just for a little while about the things that we are going to be speaking about, what we want to hear from you all, and the conversations that we will be continuing as a state over the next couple of months. So with that, Commissioner, please take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chelsea, and thanks everyone for being here this evening. I want to be able to talk about a few things related to this very important topic. And first and foremost is the big why of why does school funding matter? Why now of all times? And what do we hope to accomplish? And so when we think about, and certainly the pandemic has showed us, that there are a tremendous number of things that we want to do and that we frankly can do for students when we are given access to the right resources and materials. And this conversation is to kickstart that. One thing very importantly I want to start out with is that we are going to have, I think, a lot of feedback from a lot of different folks. This is meant to be an inclusive conversation. Every voice matters and every voice counts because this is about all of us and our state. This is about public school funding. I'm going to say it again. I'll probably say it 6 or 7 more times. This is about public school funding. And so what we are looking to do is think through what it could be if we dream big, if we think big, if we go beyond what we know what is now and think more about what could be. This is a real legacy opportunity for all of us, the entire state, to come together and think about what can be true for public education. What do we want for our children? What hopes and dreams do we have? And what is necessary to ensure they all accomplish those hopes and dreams? So a little bit about what we're looking to build. So when we say a student-based funding formula, I want to separate that, so I'm going to put that over here. Money follows the kid is way over here. So when we're talking about a student-based funding formula, that is just how the dollars are generated. So a student-based funding formula says we look at each individual child and figure out what is necessary for that child to thrive and be successful. Now, I always talk about my 3 kids because I can't help it. I'm a proud mama of 3. Jack's TBD. We'll see how he turns out. But Ellie and Abby, we've got a good sense of where they're going. They are very, very different little girls in our public schools in Nashville. They're going to need different things in their education. They already do. So for a funding formula that is student-based is looking at the needs of Eleanor and everything that she is and who she wants to be and funding her needs. And those are different than Abigail's. And so when we think about what that could mean for students with disabilities, for students in rural communities, for our English learners, for economically disadvantaged students, for K through 2. I think a lot of you know I have a deep love for literacy and we talk a lot about smaller class sizes. Do we need something different for our elementary school students? When we think about high school students and matriculating into post-secondary programs, what additional supports might those students need? That's what a student-based funding formula does. It looks at the student, it funds the student, and that aggregates up to a district. That is what we're looking to build. What we are hoping to hear from you all is what you want in that formula. What are the things that matter the most to you? We've heard a lot in just our first 3 town halls about counselors and nurses, school psychologists. We've heard a lot about literacy, financial literacy, civics. We've heard a lot about CTE and high school programs and how we can make better connections for students into the pathways that they will enter after they graduate. Those are all the types of pieces of feedback that we need to think about what could be and dream big. What we also want to talk about is this process and how it works. It's a lot of feedback in 3 months. I actually feel very lucky that I get to crisscross over the state during the most beautiful time of year. I will say I'm a little impartial to East Tennessee because it is just gorgeous. And so I've been taking pictures and sending them home to my mom. So thank you for welcoming us here during this time period. But one of the things that we want to do for community feedback is we will have these town halls. We will have Twitter town halls about every other week, newsletters. We will be collecting feedback from community organizations who will have their own town halls. Lots of our school districts are thinking about having their own ways to engage. All of that can get submitted. All will be read and coded. Every single piece of information that is submitted to the department will be coded to 1 or more subcommittees. Those subcommittees are made up of a chair and somewhere between 8 to 10 additional people, usually representing larger groups across the state. Those subcommittees will review every single piece of information sent to them. They will look at what has to be in a formula, what must be in there, what really should be, what would be nice to have, and then the long shot you never know bucket. And I never give up on the long shot bucket, but we'll have that too. They'll then cost out each of those resources and provide recommendations to the steering committee. So the steering committee will essentially get 18 recommendations, 1 from each subcommittee, based on all of the feedback that has been reviewed. And so that's just kind of a little bit how it works. The steering committee, the big steering committee that's going to get all of these recommendations, are made up of those who have been selected into leadership positions in the General Assembly, representing education and finance. I'm the great facilitator. That is my job on that particular steering committee. But those are the folks who, as Chelsea said, will ultimately be responsible for proposing and either approving or not any potential new formula. So that's a little bit about how the process works. Really encourage you and folks at home to continue to provide feedback. We've had a number of people who made comments and then said, oh, but I forgot one thing. Oh, I forgot one more thing. I went home, talked to my child, and I have 2 more things. Keep the feedback coming. This is a really, I think, a big opportunity for all of us to build. What we've seen over the last 18 months is that it is really easy to critique. It is really easy to take apart. I think building something, creating something, living in a space of hope and optimism and sense of possibility, that's really hard. It's gotten really hard for everybody. This is one of those times where we can actually just think big, and we're not going to get everything we want. That's never going to happen. But we can get something really great for kids. And what I hope we can do tonight and over the next 3 months is to dream big, to think about what our legacy can be for this period of time, for the students we serve each and every day, 1 million of them in our public schools, that we can think about them, what we want to be true for them, and build something that will serve them for years to come. So I'm so grateful that you are here. I'm excited to hear what you have to say, and we'll get to it. So with that, I will turn it back over to Chelsea. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We are very excited to get started tonight, and there are a couple of dozen of you who have signed up to speak. So we are going to try and move this along as quickly as we can, but I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to say their piece. First up, we are going to have Lee Johnson speaking. Lee, if you could raise your hand. I see you, sir. We will bring a microphone to you. After Lee will be Meredith McGann. Meredith, if you would raise your hand. Yes, ma'am. We'll bring a microphone to you. Mr. Johnson, if you would please just hold the microphone close to your mouth so that everyone can hear, and you are good to go with your 2 minutes, sir.
Hi, I'm Lee Johnson. I'm native of Knoxville. First 20 years here, and then I spent 21 in the military and left that, came back to another commercial job here, retired here, and I'm still involved in real estate. So I'm taxed pretty heavy on the property that I have going to the school board. And so what I found a problem here, I'll just have to read this instead of doing anything else. The problem, Christine Lynn Ramsey Hancock posted a West Knoxville Republican Club Facebook page dated August the 20th of 21. It shows a gay pride flag displayed in the science teacher's classroom at Northwest Middle School. I've talked to a number of Tennessee representatives, both active and retired, about this issue. According to Tim Burchett and Stacy Cofield, they served in the Tennessee legislature. The law was passed forbidding this kind of activity. Teachers in grades K through 8 are not allowed to bring up or have any materials relating to sexual activity other than the natural reproduction. If a teacher violates this law, a teacher and his principal can lose tenure and be fired. I'm still trying to get a copy of that law. The teachers and principals should know the details of this law. It's a very sensitive subject for our young children, especially in the K grades. In times I've heard teachers say they're professionals and they know more what's better for our children than we do. And I'll miss that one part down here about commissioners. The problem, speaking of flags, what chaos would occur if we let teachers display their choice of flags in the classroom, or if we allowed public officials to display choice of flags in their government offices? America has people from all over the world. We can't leave anybody out, so here's a small list of flags which teachers could choose from. Black Lives Matter, Gay Pride flag, Jewish flag, Christian flag, Muslim flag, Confederate flag, Nazi flag, skinhead flag, Communist Chinese flags, judicial terrorist flags. As I said before, we can't leave anybody out. United Nations recognizes over 175 flags. So the answer to this problem is K through 12. Only 2 flags should be permitted in the public classrooms, inside or outside on the flagpoles. The state of Tennessee flag and the flag of the United States of America. And I have a picture to show you of the gay pride flag.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your couple of minutes.
We're waiting on somebody to get sued, because if you allow it for one person, you got to allow it for all.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johnson. We are going to move to Meredith McGann, who's a little bit further back in the room. Up next will be Tanya Coats. So Tanya, if you could please raise your hand. Yes, ma'am, we'll bring a microphone over to you. With that, Ms. McGann, please go ahead and get started with your 2 minutes.
Awesome, thank you. And hopefully I will just take 30 seconds or so. So first, I want to extend my gratitude to the department and to the commissioner and to UT for hosting us and for hosting all of these events to create a forum for community members to share their insights. So my name is Meredith McGann. I am with Tennesseans for Student Success. I'm a school counselor by training, and I am super passionate about working to create an educational landscape that works for all students, and I know that's why you are all here as well. So these town halls are wonderful to gather community voices, and continued community engagement is what will keep the issue at the forefront of legislators' minds going into the next session. So my role with TSS is to gather and amplify those voices. So I am with one of those community organizations that will be continuing to host forums and opportunities for you all to continue your activism and get involved further. So if you would like to become involved in any continued advocacy, or just to learn more or hear about other resources that you could take with you back into your communities, I'm going to be in the lobby after the town hall, and I would love to hopefully meet some of you and talk with you about ways to continue your engagement. So again, thank you to all of you for being here in the department and the commissioner. And I am done.
Thank you so much, Ms. McGann. I appreciate that. Our next speaker will be Tanya Coats. Following Tanya is Mr. Dave Gorman. Dave, if you would raise your hand. I see you, sir. We will bring a microphone to you. Tanya, you are good to go with your 2 minutes.
So I appreciate the opportunity to speak this evening. My question has to do with, or a statement at least, when we're thinking about mandates for the state, it's disheartening to know that we're 46th in the United States as it becomes to per pupil funding for our students. And we need to do a little bit better job when you're saying that we wanted to make sure that it's student focused. When we are trying to ensure in public schools that we are having the RTI, which is response to intervention, and we just recently got that funded. We'd hope that those are being funded as it relates to students with special needs, that we're funding special needs areas, that we're also funding in classrooms as it relates to, as you stated earlier, nurses, counselors, and security officers where we have in our schools. All these, in order to run a public school, we need all of these resources. And sometimes when we, at the state level, we don't have these resources that are available. We're hoping that the state will take the opportunity to really, I'm also grateful to hear that we're not going to use the old BEP formula, right? That formula is, it's been said for years that it's confusing. And if we really want to do a basic education formula, it needs to be basic. One that parents can understand, one that districts can understand, because they don't have the funding when it comes down to actually disseminating the funds in the district. We're hoping that the state will take this chance of making sure that everything that is required to run a school is actually laid out in that formula. Saying that if we need meals for students on a day-to-day basis, that needs to be in that formula. When we want to make sure that we have after-school activities, and I set myself timer myself, but we're just hoping that you also have these all-inclusive when it comes to the BEP formula, or as we say, the new formula that is going to be formulated, and not use something that we've used in existence that is not beneficial to the rest of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Coates. I am just tickled that you timed yourself. You certainly did not have to do that, but I appreciate the spirit there. Okay, next up we have Dave Gorman. Following Dave will be Kim Krenek. I hope I've gotten this last name right. Kim, I see you. We will bring a microphone to you, ma'am. Dave, please go ahead with your 2 minutes.
Thank you. As a public school teacher for 21 years here in Knoxville, I welcome the opportunity to remind those gathered here and across the state of the great obligation of the state of Tennessee has to provide a free and fair public education to all of our children, all of them. The public school is a hallmark of democracy, and it is our responsibility to improve the lives and increase opportunities for our children. Well, how much do we value those children? Are we finally willing to truly commit to providing them with what they need and what they deserve? From our state constitution, the state of Tennessee recognizes the inherent value of education and encourages its support. The General Assembly shall provide for the maintenance, support, and eligibility standards of a system of free public schools. Tanya, you said we're 46th in funding in the country? Inherent value. Please fund these mandates. Fund school counselors, nurses, support staff. Fund it all. We need it. Especially, we've seen this in the last couple of years with our response to COVID and how that's made some kids really, really struggle and teachers really struggle. Our students and our public schools are inherently valuable.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gorman. Next up is Kim Krenek. Following Kim will be Ben Krenek. So Ben, if you could raise your hand. Krenek, thank you. I appreciate that. I try to get them right, but I don't always do that. Kim Krenek, please go ahead with your 2 minutes and we'll follow you up with Ben.
Thank you. Thank you for holding these town halls. I've actually listened to all 3 of them online, and they are super. I'm here to talk about the special education funding piece of the BEP formula. I am quite honestly thrilled to see a full reconsideration of the BEP funding formula because it forces a new and hopefully very informed decision to be made regarding the special education funding mechanism that must be made in compliance with IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. I want to specifically comment on what this means for students with involved disabilities, like one of our 3 sons, Ben, who's right here, whose unique physical, instructional, and sign language interpreting needs necessitate the provision of direct adult support in the general education environment to uphold their educational rights. Under the least restrictive environment provision of IDEA, there is a very important statement regarding the state funding mechanism. It reads as follows: a state funding mechanism must not result in placements that violate the requirements of paragraph A of this section. One of the requirements to which this statement refers is that before a student is removed to a special class, known in our state as CDC or Comprehensive Developmental Classroom, the IEP team must first consider whether a student can be educated satisfactorily in the regular class with what are known as supplementary aids and services. Paraprofessional support in the regular ed setting is one such service, and the funding mechanism cannot promote or incentivize a segregated placement over a less restrictive one. The Disabilities Subcommittee and Tennessee Legislature must understand our state's responsibility to create a funding mechanism that adheres to IDEA. I have sent an email with a link to a lot of information on this topic. Happy reading, Commissioner. I and others have spent 6 years advocating for our state special ed funding mechanism to align with IDEA requirements regarding educational placements. We see this funding review as a way to move forward to finally get it right. Thank you for considering the information I have provided in these remarks and via email.
Thank you so much for your remarks. Next, we'll hear from Ben Krenek. So Ben, you are good to go and get started with your 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Ben Krenek, and I am 22 years old, and I have autism. I was a student in Knox County schools for 12 years, and I was fully included with an aide in regular classes in Sequoia Elementary, Vine Middle Magnet, and West High School. I just graduated from the University of Tennessee Future Program, where I learned so much in my UT classes, made many friends, and learned to live independently in an off-campus apartment in my last 2 years. I am now busy with several work opportunities. It was really important to have my aides because I didn't start talking for a while, but I was always listening and learning. My aides helped all of my teachers and classmates, not just me. I am one of the very few students in our district who needed an aide and got one. There are a lot of kids like me who can be included the way I was. So I hope this new funding formula will fix things so they can have the best time in school like I did. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Krenek. Our next speaker is Michael OMalley. Michael, if you would raise your hand, sir. I see you right there in the middle. We'll bring a microphone to you right here in the middle with a striped shirt. Michael OMalley. Following Michael OMalley will be Tiffany Cofield. So Tiffany, if you would raise your hand. Yes, ma'am, I see you. We'll bring a microphone to you. And next, Mr. OMalley, please go ahead and get started with your 2 minutes.
Sure. I teach in Knox County schools, and I'm glad the family who spoke before me brought up the need for aides and other very basic infrastructural resources that students will need. I noticed on this paper it says that the new funding formula will hopefully prioritize students over systems, and I think students should have everything that they need, but I think that prioritizing students over systems is maybe that's a weird way to put it because students live in the system. We have to create a system that supports the students. The fact that individual students will need individual resources is true, but it is also true that we need to create environments in which, no matter the student who enters, they'll be able to get what they need. For example, at my school, we didn't have a full-time nurse until we had COVID money. At my school, we're just now kind of rebuilding a lot of the CTE stuff after it being defunded several years ago. These are things that are not tied to individual student needs, but rather an environment in which students with a variety of needs can be served. And to simply, I think, individualize some of the needs might be losing the forest for the trees. Those individual needs 100% need to be met. But also, I sometimes worry that when we focus on like funding per student, we miss out on the fact that, like, for instance, how many students should qualify us to have an extra counselor? how many students should qualify us to have an extra secretarial staff. There are simply things that I don't think necessarily correlate to individual student ledger lines. For example, aides, custodial staff, secretaries, these people make literally half of what teachers do on the Knox County schools salary scale. And how many students more need to be enrolled in a school for a custodial staff's salary to go up? There's no number attached to that, right? These are positions that are needed regardless of the students who are in the schools, regardless of individualized needs for all students needs to be met. And I think that the state of Tennessee and Knox County schools in particular has a real problem with underfunding some of those basic environmental needs. We should have adequately staffed counselors regardless of how many students are in that school. We should have adequate payment for aides and custodial staff in addition to the individualized needs of students as well.
Thank you so much, Mr. OMalley. We will hear next from Tiffany Cofield. After Tiffany will be Donna Rossland. So Donna, if you would raise your hand right next door, we'll come to you next, ma'am, with a microphone. Tiffany, please go ahead and get started with your 2 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Tiffany Cofield, and I have 4 young children, 3 of whom are currently enrolled in Knox County schools in 2nd grade, 1st grade, and preschool. Our oldest, Josiah, has an aide for 6 hours in a regular classroom and has 1 hour of pull-out to resource each day. He is thriving. What we went through in kindergarten to get to this point was horrific, a parent's worst nightmare. And it was all unnecessary because Josiah started out kindergarten with basically the same exact services as what he gets now. The difference is that the aide in kindergarten on his IEP was never hired. That meant all these other people in the school, like office staff, the resource teacher, and really anyone they could find, had to fill in to support Josiah in the regular class. Eventually, Josiah stayed more and more in the resource room, and a few months later, the school wanted him to go to another school that had a program they said he needed. Without going into detail, we had to hire attorneys, and our case settled for what should have been his placement all along if they had just hired the aide that was listed on his IEP for kindergarten. When I eventually learned about the funding going on from 2 students to fund 1 aide to 16.5 students, I thought, well, I guess one of those other 15 and a half kids got his kindergarten aide. There are so many incredible educators and staff in this district, but I believe the state funding formula is strangling our school system when it comes to properly serving students with disabilities in their least restrictive environments. I believe the current funding formula is and has been forcing Knox County to choose litigation over education because KCS has calculated that very few people even though their students' rights and even fewer will file for due process hearing. So that's the wrong kind of funding formula, in my opinion, where money is going to attorneys instead of instruction. Please do right by all our kids and present a new funding mechanism for students with disabilities that follows the law. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cofield. Next is Donna Rossland. Following Donna will be Marjorie Lloyd. Marjorie, if you would raise your hand. Yes, ma'am, we'll bring you a microphone. Donna, please go ahead and get started with your 2 minutes.
Thank you for letting me speak. I'm the mother of Will, forgive me for getting emotional, otherwise known as WH, in the 2015 lawsuit over the funding mechanism. I am also speaking on behalf of the parents of the other 2 plaintiffs in the case, JB and JA. All students were placed in unnecessarily restrictive educational environments and presented as examples of a systemic practice in that filing. Through effective advocacy in our IEP meetings, our children proved that they could be educated satisfactorily in the regular classroom environment. Our efforts in that legal action we took were solely to fix what we realized was the root of the problem, leading to improper placement of students with pervasive disabilities, a faulty state funding mechanism. And we were successful, well, at least we thought we were. The case was settled with a promise by the Tennessee Department of Education to improve the funding mechanism. Imagine our shock and our dismay when the improvement took funding for the supplementary support of an aide, attendant, or sign language interpreter for 2 kids, funding 1 staff position to needing 16.5 kids with this service on their IEPs to fund just 1 position. While I absolutely respect that this town hall is designed to discuss the possibilities for our future funding formula, it is imperative that our decision makers understand the history of this issue so that the new funding formula avoids violating the IDEA and re-litigation. This is the state's chance to comply with IDEA and fix what was broken and broken again. To wrap up my comments on a positive note, Will, my son, achieved full inclusion with aid support in middle school after having been erroneously placed in CDC for many years. He has never had behaviors that impede his learning or that of others. He is now in 10th grade at West High School. He is on the cross country and swim team and is earning an alternate academic diploma. And he can't stop talking about wanting to go to UT Future program and live in the dorms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rossland. Next up is Marjorie Lloyd. Following Marjorie will be Caitlin Jones. So Caitlin, if you could raise your hand, please. I see you here in the middle. We'll bring a microphone to you. Marjorie, please go ahead and get started with your 2 minutes.
I'm Marjorie Lloyd. I am a graduate from Knoxville County Schools, UT undergraduate and a UT master's. I am a licensed counselor with the state, which includes being a mental health service provider. I have seen what I would call an inequity in schools. My children graduated from Oak Ridge High School, and they graduated with enough credits that they could be sophomores in college because of AP classes. I have a granddaughter in Oliver Springs. She's very, very smart, skipped kindergarten. They don't have AP classes. I have done counseling in many schools that are in the counties, rural schools. I have been able to do in person with students in Sunbright and in Oakdale, which are grades 1 through 12. And these schools, I would say, I'm sure have some good teachers, but what I see is these schools do not, I'm not sure about that formula much, but they do not get equal funding because like Oak Ridge their taxes are, we are taxed and we have very excellent schools. People pay tuition to go there. But is it really fair that, what about these kids in the rural schools? What about kids in the inner city schools? What my concern is an inequity of the teachers. We need to be paying, we really should be paying teachers more to go to schools that are underfunded, that are doing less than their best with their grading, and or may find some way that we can make people who are the top-notch students, top-notch graduates, in education, top-notch teachers. What's going to motivate them to go to a inner city school or a school out there in the counties where they really don't have as much to work with. They don't have the parents who push for a lot more classes. They don't have really PTAs bring a whole lot of money in, and they hold a whole lot of influence. So we need to be thinking about better pay for all of our teachers. And we have a brain drain. We have a lot of people leaving the state because they can get paid other places much better. The equity, we should be looking at focusing primarily on reaching average equity. In other words, looking at what is the income of our population, and the average in the United States is 3.37% of their students getting the 3.37% of the GDP is the average for most states, and ours is 2.56%. We really need to be working on that to bring that up, but we need to look at what is equity. We shouldn't be leaving behind any of our students, whether they're out in the boonies or in the city. Here's another idea that could be, pay gas mileage for teachers. Teachers, like up in the county. People just don't want to go out there. It's it's quite a ways off, but if they're getting paid properly, they might be motivated to go. We just need to look at a lot of different ideas, brainstorm how could we attract better teachers to schools where it may be a little bit harder to attract teachers.
Thank you so much for your comments, Ms. Lloyd. We are going now to Caitlin Jones. Following Caitlin will be Megan Barrelay Fogarty. Megan, if you would raise your hand. Yes, ma'am, I see you. We'll bring a microphone to you. Ms. Jones, you are good to go with your 2 minutes.
My name is Caitlin Jones, and I am the single mother of a 6-year-old named Alec. Alec has Down syndrome and was recently diagnosed with autism. Over the last 20 months or so, Alec has not only halted on his educational and developmental progress, but he's really regressed exponentially. However, I have noticed that Alec has started at ALOTS, and he seems to be making steps in the right direction. And I believe this can partially be contributed to his current teachers and the TAs. As a single mom, I've found it increasingly difficult to continue supporting Alec and myself in the Knoxville community with the way that the community and pricing is, and will likely have to move out of the county. One thing Alec does not do so well with is change, and I'm worried that if I must move and he has to change schools, he'll begin regression once again. So when you allow the funding to focus on the child, it could possibly open up the opportunity to stay in his current school, even if moving would change the district that he was zoned for. In the recent weeks, I've been involved more so in Alec's education plan and also looking at what would be best provided by the school system for him. And if the funding focused on the child, this would allow his team of educators and myself to tailor a curriculum that is best for him, and we would not be constrained with so much governmental red tape. Something I also wanted to advocate for is more transparency, not only in how the state was distributing the funding, but also how the funding was spent once it's received. This will make it easier for parents to see their education, the education their tax dollars will be funding. And with all of this, I urge you to make the right decision in allowing parents and the communities to choose the education that's best for their child. Something that I really want to focus on is like something that other people have said is also making sure that the support staff would be funded that would be needed to tailor an education based on a child, and not focusing on what school is performing the best or things of that nature, because I feel like our children with disabilities are sometimes forgotten, and I think that that has to do with funding. So my question to you and the people who would be making this decision is what you're going to do to empower families to choose what's best for their kids, and how the funding will help that, and what the community and myself can do to support you to make sure that we're able to get the funding for our kids with special needs that they need to be able to thrive in the education system.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jones. Next up is Megan Barrelay Fogarty. Following Megan will be Bob Kross, I think is this last name. I see you, sir. We will bring a microphone to you. Megan, please go ahead with your 2 minutes.
Hello, thank you for having us here and listening to us and our important feedback. I'm Megan Barrelay Fogarty. I'm the mother of 2 sons in Knox County Public Schools. I'm also the Director of Youth and Family Engagement at Centro Hispano de East Tennessee, which is a nonprofit that serves the Latino population of Knox County and the surrounding regions through after-school programs and family engagement, among many other programs. I'm super excited about the prospect of student-centered funding and the reimagining of the BEP in Tennessee. As a member of a statewide cohort that participated in the School Finance Institute organized by the Education Trust, we learned about the BEP and examined more equitable options utilized by other states in calculating school funding, and usually the student-centered funding was the way to go. The first truth to face, however, is that Tennessee simply does not allocate enough funding in its regular budget to fully and equitably educate its youth. Before we discuss how to equitably distribute funding, we must first commit to putting our money where our mouth is and investing in education. Currently, the Education Law Center gives Tennessee an F in funding for education, and we're ranked 43 out of 51 in state and local revenue per student. I know that we can do better. Secondly, Tennessee must commit to funding all children equitably through a robust public education system. Tennessee has seen a significant increase in multilingual learners, and student-based funding formula could greatly help support districts and schools with high percentages of EL students. However, it's important that we're truly discussing how to improve options for all students and ensuring that public funding stay committed to schools that meet the full federal and state requirements for education for English learners, special education students, and other students that deserve additional supports. Giving some parents a choice that decreases funding for all students, unfortunately, ends up being fundamentally inequitable. Finally, I did ask my 13-year-old what he wanted to say. He wasn't as brave as you, Ben, to come and say it himself, but he said better and larger, more school lunches, and more hands-on learning was really what he was looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Fairley Fogarty. Next up is Bob Kross. Following Bob will be Laura Hunt. Laura, if you would raise your hand, please, ma'am. I see you back there, and we will bring a microphone to you. Bob, please go ahead and get started with your 2 minutes.
First of all, I'd like to say kids don't leave their problems at home when they come to school. So we've got to figure out that the school is the main place that we're going to have to deal with things that maybe historically were handled by corrections or mental health or something else. So I would ask that education be the leader, open the door and start thinking systemically. Work together with these other agencies so that we don't have the problems that we're facing. 50% of America's kids who are coming to school live in poverty. Think about that. Think about the basic needs of food, shelter, and clothing that they do not have, and yet you want them to learn. And I'm really impressed with some of the young folks here who are teachers. I think that's great. I think we need to support them as much as possible. Number 2, I'd like to see us take a little chapter from John Lewis. Do some bad trouble. No, he said good trouble. Do some good trouble. Yeah. I like it that way better. Anyway, I think sitting on the sidelines is horrible. I think we are way too passive in this country now, and now's the time not to be sitting still. The issues are too much at cost to not. Ask Randy Boyd how many promise programs he's come up with. You know, are we involved in those promise programs? Are we volunteering? Are we getting, somehow the organizations that we work with involved? We need to do more of that. I also think that we've got at least 2 things that I'd like to have you think about. One is not very polite. Don't privatize. Stay away from it. If you want to read some articles that I wrote in the early 80s on a correctional school in Dandridge and one in Nashville, the public program outperformed them incredibly. The program up in Dandridge was running buses to Taft Youth Center on a regular basis because they couldn't handle those kids. So I'm a Democrat. I believe in democracy. Private schools isn't going to do that. And look to see what Betsy DeVos is trying to do in this state. I think that's really wrong. So what I'm hoping is that you young folks will get involved. People like me have been at it a while. I started the first group home for kids in this state back in the 70s because I saw a kid hang himself for being truant in the juvenile facility here. And now you got a judge in Middle Tennessee who's violating what's called in re Galt. Anybody know what the Galt decision was? It's a Supreme Court case that says kids are entitled to due process under the law. She's violating that. And nobody seems to care except ProPublica, and they're not the answer. We need people from Rutherford and Davidson and Knox and wherever else to get involved. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Kross. Next up is Laura Hunt. Following Laura will be Lance McCold. Lance, if you could raise your hand, please. I see you, sir, right over here. We'll bring a microphone. Laura, you are good to go with your 2 minutes.
Thanks, Chelsea, and thanks, Commissioner. I'm Laura Hunt. I'm with Tennessee CAN. I'm the State Manager of Advocacy and Strategy. I've been following the Commissioner around to all these different events. I want to echo what Meredith said. We both work in advocacy across the state. So any teachers or parents here that some of your stories have been really compelling, we help you amplify those voices in the state legislature. So if you're interested in talking to me afterwards, I'll also have cards and I'll be out in the lobby or you can find me. It's great to be back on Rocky Top. I'm a product of Maryville City Schools here in East Tennessee and Rocky Top also. I just want to echo some of the comments already made. We're definitely in support of a more student-centered funding formula. specifically, this would be more funding for special needs and disabilities, more ESL teachers, more funding for low-income students and rural students. I know we definitely have some of those in this area. And then wraparound services for school counselors, nurses, interventionists, RTI specialists, social workers, all of those things. And as some other parents have said, more transparency for parents to be able to advocate for how much funding their children is receiving. So I have flyers outside on the table, and I also just want to say that Meredith and I are both co-hosting a call on Monday, November 8th at 12. And we're just going to kind of talk about what the current funding formula looks like and what more deep dive of what a student-centered funding formula could look like. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Laura. Next up is Mr. Lance McCold. Following Lance is Elizabeth Evans. Elizabeth, if you would raise your hand. Yes, ma'am, I see you. We'll bring a microphone to you. Mr. McCold, please go ahead and get started with your 2 minutes.
All right. I guess I'm just going to bring to focus what I've heard from every single speaker so far. The problem is not enough money. And any funding formula you come up with that doesn't provide enough money to provide the resources is not going to do any better than the BEP with all its flaws. You've got to adequately fund the schools. You've got to have funding that is actually appropriate and sufficient for the work to be done. And I'll just, on a personal note, I'm saying I'm wondering whether I'm wasting my time talking here, because the way this whole process is set up, it looks like it's intended as a dog and pony show, and nothing that really matters, which is more funding, is going to change. I hope I'm wrong. That's what I want to say. We need adequate funding. We shouldn't be 46. We should be at least 25th in the nation. You know, something. But this is insane. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. McCold. Next up is Elizabeth Evans. Following Elizabeth will be Virginia Henderson. Virginia, if you'd raise your hand. Yes, ma'am, I see you. We'll bring a microphone to you. Okay, Elizabeth, please go ahead and get started with your 2 minutes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Evans, and I was honored to be invited here tonight as a co-host because I am serving on the Tennessee Advisory Council as one of the finalists for Tennessee Teacher of the Year and a representative for East Tennessee, and I'm here tonight representing Henderson County Schools. I graduated high school in Tennessee, and I'm a proud UT Knoxville alum, so thank you to the department and the university for hosting tonight. In my county, we have the motto, every student, every day. I've learned so much about how much goes into truly investing in each student in Tennessee during my career. I have the unique privilege to serve on the subcommittee that's going to be representing educators as they restructure the budget. And so I would like to bring up a few of the things that I'm hoping for and give you all my contact information in case I can further represent you on that committee. So echoing what a lot of you have said, my hope is to address funding for mental health services and moving towards schools being in ratio for the recommendations for professional health organizations related to school counseling and social work. I'm currently receiving my endorsement in school counseling, and more than ever, I believe it is imperative to focus on mental health. Funding for public schools versus pushing towards voucher programs, and then creating transparency for the communities that these kind of programs would affect. I also think it's important to look at continuing to counteract the impact of COVID-19, as well as funding for special education and continuing training for staff in general education as well as special education. And then also what a lot of you have said tonight is that where our ranking is in the nation for funding per student, but also we rank 41st in the nation in average teacher salary according to the NEA. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that as we restructure the budget, because that impacts teacher retention and quality. Additionally, this impacts things like class sizes. So the staff I work with every day are amazing, and I believe Tennessee educators are incredible. I'd like to say that anyone who is present or tuning in is welcome to email me at eevans@acs.ac if you'd feel comfortable, and I'd love to continue including you all in the discussion. Thank you for your time.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. Virginia Henderson is next. Following Virginia is another Virginia. Okay. Virginia is needing some ASL interpretation, and so we will. Oh, thank you. Oh.
not used to using a microphone, teach deaf children.
Perfect.
I do teach at the Tennessee School for the Deaf. It is one of the state's special schools. There are 3 campuses, one in Nashville, one in Jackson, one here in Knoxville. We also have the School for the Blind that's in Nashville, and York Institute up in Fentress County. They are all fully funded by the state. You all talk about BEP, we have no clue what that is. We don't generate BEP funds. I do want to brag on our nursing staff. You all talk about not having enough nurses. We have a full clinic. Most of the kids live on campus, so it's fantastic to have that. We have different salaries among our 3 campuses. We get paid less in Knox County than the teachers at the School for the Deaf in Nashville earn. The teachers in Jackson get paid less than Nashville, but more than we do. We all work for the same group of people, but we get different salaries. I want to reiterate about being 46th in the country. We need to be better than that. We got to beat Alabama. Come on, we got to beat Alabama. Special education funding needs to increase. Every single one of my students is on an IEP. Most have at least a secondary handicapping condition. I cannot explain to you how much more effort, energy it takes to educate those children. Our education specialist salaries, horrific. One of them told me today, you know, I could make more money if I quit this job and went and worked at Chick-fil-A. How sad is that? We gave students who needed it hotspots last year during COVID. One of my students lives out in Campbell County. You think the hotspot worked? Guess the first time he tried to use it. Mom, people think about teachers. When do you think the very first time that kid tried to use his hotspot? My evaluation. How many times do you think it froze? Have you ever tried to do a Zoom teaching lesson with a little rectangle and it freezes? That evaluation did not go very well. I lived through it. The rest of us did too. Please, please, please increase the funding. We have the money. Let's spend it on the kids.
Thank you, Ms. Henderson. Appreciate that and your volunteer spirit. Want to relieve our interpreter. Really, really appreciate that. Our next speaker is another Virginia Babb. I'll ask you to raise your hand, please, ma'am. I see you. Following Virginia will be Mr. Mark Watson. I believe you're over here, sir. We'll bring a microphone to you. Virginia Babb, please go ahead and get started with your 2 minutes.
I feel like I'm saying pretty much what everyone else has said, but you know, there's several things. When we have traditionally looked in the past at the ratios, what we are asking our teachers, counselors, nurses, everybody, I mean, by no national standards is it sufficient. We've got to look at the caseloads and what we're requiring and fund it properly. So we need more personnel, but we also have got to fund that personnel better. And I think, you know, as somebody talked about Chick-fil-A, I mean, right now we're in dire need of employees everywhere. So when Target and Chick-fil-A are paying more than things like our, you know, custodial staff, our TAs, we always have struggled, but now more than ever, we are not paying these people enough. We're not paying our teachers enough. We continue to say we want the best and brightest to going into teaching, but we're not paying them to do that. I have friends of mine's children that are becoming speech therapists. Nobody is planning on going into the school system. They don't get paid the same as they can in the private sector or in the hospital setting or other places. If we're not paying competitively, we are not going to keep good people. I just hope that we continue to look at all of these issues, and I probably reiterate everything that everybody else in here has said.
Thank you so much, Ms. Babb. Our next speaker is Mark Watson. Following Mark will be Noah Smith, and Noah will be our final speaker for the evening. So Noah, if you would raise your hand way back in the back. Yes, sir. Mr. Watson, please go ahead with your 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Mark Watson. I'm the city manager of Oak Ridge,
and also chairman of a group called Coalition for Better Schools, which represents 39 municipally funded school systems across the state of Tennessee. And as we look at that, there is a concern that those 39 school systems also need to be represented as we discuss financing, because financing boils down to the municipal governments that take on the debt. And there's horrible impacts that can occur if we're not wise on how we develop the payments for some of the improvements that need to be done into our school systems and facilities that we are talking about. Most recently, I developed a pre-kindergarten facility in Oak Ridge, and I learned more about potty time than I ever thought I would. And as you look at the requirements that are there today for rooms and windows and security and so forth, our schools are not set up to do this. So one of the suggestions that I have is that we spent approximately $900,000 in sales taxes on developing a $10 million school. Our schools need to be exempt from those kinds of taxes for public facilities that are being developed. And if you think of the millions of dollars that go in on capital projects every day, this is one way that we can help support the finances that are needed to develop the raises and the improvements in education. So I spent some time today to look at this, and I do believe that municipalities can provide some of the background associated with running and financing good school systems. However, we have to be careful because cities are the final funding agent after all of the BEP has been provided, and we must look at that. A couple other suggestions that we have brought along today, and I'll be sending this in to people to read on this, but one of the things that we have is maintenance of effort, and maintenance of effort is having a reverse trend on the finances associated with our school systems. And those school systems, by having a maintenance of effort, is kind of like Hotel California. You can go up in cost, but you can never leave. Okay, and so as we look at maintenance of effort, that is an obsolete term that really needs to be allowed for localized budgeting and working with school boards. And when you have a cooperative school board with a cooperative local government, be it county or city, there's an opportunity to do that. So local capacity also has to be taken into consideration. I think of the citizens up in Lebanon. This past year had a huge tornado, natural disaster. Recovery after that natural disaster is difficult for those communities, and that also needs to be taken into consideration in financing these programs. So as a member of these coalitions for better schools, we hope that the municipal school systems can have some representation and add their expertise as to what they have found over the years in this system. So we'll look forward to monitoring the details of and progress of this report and be willing to help in any way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, for your comments. Final speaker for the evening is Mr. Noah Smith. I see you, sir. Please go ahead and get started with your 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you. So I might be one of the youngest speakers here. I don't know if there's anyone here, but I am 22 years old. I'm a senior here at UT. And one of the fun facts about me is that when I was 18 and a freshman here at UT, I ran for a school board in Campbell County, so Virginia. I can fully attest to what you said. And I was elected. So I was elected at 18, passionate about education. My family's full of educators. My mother is a school teacher, was a school teacher. My aunt and uncle are both principals in Tennessee. And then my grandmother was also an educator. So I come from a family of educators. But I got the unique opportunity to serve on a school board at a young age. And that came with some difficulties, and one of the biggest things was funding, especially in a rural county such as Campbell County. So we're in Tennessee, we're creating inequities not based on race, gender, or color anymore. We're creating inequities based on locations and where you live. So rural counties such as Campbell, which has over 50% of the students who live in poverty, who get free and reduced lunch from the federal government, who drive, or over 50% of the students take a school bus to school, and maybe their commute is over 45 minutes. This is what we're creating inequities in. And as a school board member, I had to make the decision, or the decision came to us, and thank God we were saved by this decision, and I didn't have to make the decision, but we almost had to make, I, as an 18-year-old, almost had to make the decision to close a rural school in the mountains of Campbell County. So when Virginia said that the hotspots don't work, the hotspots don't work. There's still coverage in places in Campbell County where there is no cell signal, no high-speed internet. Only about 40% of the county has access to high-speed internet. So we're not creating inequities based on color, race, or gender anymore. We're creating inequities based on access, based on the basic needs of these rural schools to operate. So if you're going to use the same funding formula here in Knox County that you're going to use in Campbell County, it's not going to work, especially in this technology-driven era that we're in right now. You know, if we're expecting, and I'm going to bring up ADM here in a minute. When you have students who rely on school buses and transportation to get to schools, and we're using ADM, which is average daily membership, as one of the biggest indicators for the BP funding formula, if bus 11 doesn't run, those students' parents are not going to drive them to school. So how are we're basically sacrificing the many for the few. We're allowing this BEP funding formula to create more inequities based on where you live and the zip code in which you reside based on, in the past, where it's been other indicators. So we have a lot of inequities in terms of rural versus urban that are not taken into account by this funding formula. And I touched on a few: transportation, access to education. You know, we still have these issues in Campbell County, just like Virginia said. When COVID hit, hotspots didn't work. Students couldn't learn. We have a huge learning gap in rural counties now. And I'm not saying Campbell, I'm saying Scott, I'm saying Morgan, I'm saying Fentress. Every rural county that's still around Knox County, Middle Tennessee, West Tennessee, we have inequities in the funding formula. You know, like I said, I had to make a decision, you know, if we were going to close this rural school. And the next school away from them was going to be 45 minutes to an hour on a bus. Now, if those, like I said, if those buses goes down, those students aren't going to school. Half of our county lives in poverty. We have home issues like Bob talked about, where we're sending students to school where their parents are drug addicted, where their parents are divorced, where their parents don't get up in the morning to take them to school. So if the school bus doesn't run and they're getting themselves up on their own, how are we as educators, as advocates, how are we going to sacrifice the many for those students who are basically living on their own? So we have a great opportunity here in Tennessee to fix this issue and stop creating these inequities. And maintenance of effort, just like was mentioned, in a rural county such as Campbell County, where there's not a lot of, where the budget is not as big as Knox County, you know, we talked about maintenance of effort and how you can't always go up, but you can't go down. So in Campbell County, you know, when we go over maintenance of effort, it might be $100,000 or $1 million. We're not talking 10 or 15 or $20 million. We don't have the tourism, we don't have the economic impact that these other counties do. So the inequities on maintenance of effort is huge in rural counties because there's not a lot of income and not a lot of economic impact driving those counties. So we have a lot of issues in the current funding formula that is now segregating urban versus rural and really, really, really need to be touched on.
Thank you so much for your comments, Mr. Smith. That will conclude our period of public comment for this evening. I know the commissioner would like to say a few remarks just to wrap us up. Before she does that, I would like to reiterate something you've heard both of us say, many of you have said it this evening. We really would like to hear from you. There is an email address where you can send your public comment. I know several of you have dropped off papers for us to take back with us this evening. More than happy to receive those. You are also welcome and encouraged to send an email to this email address. As the commissioner said, this will all go to subcommittees for review and consideration. So please take a moment to write down that email address or zip us an email. We would love to hear it. Commissioner, please close us out. Thank you. So thank you everyone again for being here. I want to reiterate, I think, the things that we've heard. And what we've heard are a lot of themes that are very, very similar. We've heard a couple of things that are different. And I think that's the beauty of a process where everyone has a voice. What I can say, and I think to address the comment and question directly, is that this is all feedback. These are all input. What we do is we facilitate a process, and we have heard a lot about funding tonight. So know that that has been documented lots of different times and is part of what is going to contribute to the ongoing conversation that we need to have about public education and how we fund our schools and what are done with those dollars. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, so I just wanted to thank our teacher from the subcommittee who is here. This is a very real process, and as you can hear, I think a great person who is putting herself out there to make sure that she can collect as much public comment as possible for her subcommittee, certainly on top of all of the other things that she is doing. So thank you for being here. I see some of my great superintendents, so I have to call you out today and your teams. And so thank you for being here. And did not acknowledge President Boyd. So if you can just wave, really appreciate you being here, sir. This is all to say that this conversation matters a lot for our students. And so when we think about what is possible, knowing that these are hard conversations, we are not all going to agree about everything, and I'm going to be very honest, not everyone is going to get everything that they want. It's the book that I read to my kids every year when they're in kindergarten. It's the Why Can't I Have Everything? We still struggle with that, especially after Halloween in my house, but we can't all have everything. What we need to do is make very smart decisions that are going to impact all of our students in a way that is going to allow them to thrive. And part of this process, to be perfectly honest, is taking a leap of faith. It has taken a leap of faith with us, with the state, that there is the possibility for change, there is the possibility for growth and improvement that is only going to happen if we all use our voices together and try to build something, create something together that is going to help all the kids that I know we care deeply about. I really appreciate all of the comments. Please continue to email, be engaged. These town halls are the kickoff event. There are lots of things to come. I encourage you to continue to stay engaged, do things at the local level, and make sure that your voice is heard. It matters for our kids. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.